In one of the harshest environments on Earth, a small predator is fighting for survival. For the past 20 years, Norway's captive breeding program for the endangered Arctic fox has worked to bring the species back from the brink of local extinction. And this year, another group of captive-born foxes are setting foot in the wild. Hi, welcome to Norway's captive breeding station for the endangered Arctic fox. Join us to find out more about how captive breeding has successfully increased the number of Arctic foxes out in the wild. To date, captive-born Arctic foxes have been released in 10 different subpopulations across Norway, from Hardangervidda in the south all the way up to the Varanger Peninsula in the very far north. Each year we carefully consider where the foxes should be released. By taking various ecological and demographic factors into account, the decision-making process enables us to maximize the likelihood of these valuable foxes surviving, establishing and reproducing in the wild. In doing so, each release has a greater probability of having a meaningful conservation impact. Once the release location is decided upon and the various logistical aspects are taken care of, we start trapping about 2 weeks before the scheduled release date. When trapping commences, we normally trap quite a few foxes initially. Many of the foxes are quite inquisitive and enticed into the baited traps. But when you have around 30 foxes to trap, the process normally takes 10 to 14 days in total. This is because, in addition to certain trap-shy individuals, there are often periods of bad weather that delay the process. Shortly after being trapped, the foxes are moved into transport boxes. We attempt to minimize handling as far as possible, so the easiest, most stress-free way to transfer them is to get them to walk into these boxes by themselves. The foxes are taken down the mountain by a snowmobile and thereafter driven to a temporary holding facility that is less than half an hour away. As soon as all the foxes have been trapped, we can prepare to load them up and transport them to the release site. Norway is a large country and sometimes the release sites are very far from the captive breeding station. For 2026, the foxes were to be released in the north of Norway. Driving the foxes up there by road would take about 48 hours of solid driving. Animal welfare is prioritized, so to minimize the stress and transport time, it was decided that we would charter a plane and fly them up north. After loading the 25 foxes into the transport boxes, they were driven for about 2 hours to the airport outside Trondheim and thereafter embarked on a mere 2-hour flight all the way up north to Alta. After arriving in Alta, the foxes were carefully unloaded and thereafter each individual was visually inspected to ensure that they were still in good health. Once cleared, they were loaded into new transport vehicles and driven towards their respective release areas. From Alta, 8 of the foxes were driven to the Varanger Peninsula and released there, while the remainder were driven about an hour inland from Alta and later released in the Nukbi and Nassa areas. The foxes were checked again that night and fed before an early start the following morning. The final stage involved snowmobile transport to the release sites, which is conducted together with rangers from the Norwegian Nature Inspectorate. The transport boxes are carefully secured onto the sleds, and then the journey proceeds through the forest above the tree line and into the species' natural habitat. Arctic foxes are released at known but presently unoccupied den sites, and when possible in areas where other Arctic foxes are present. This increases the likelihood of them establishing in the area rather than wandering elsewhere in search of other Arctic foxes. Since the first release in 2006, the program has now released over 500 captive-born Arctic foxes into the wild. This has re-established several locally extinct subpopulations and strengthened numerous others, including those in neighbouring Sweden and Finland. And finally, the highlight of each year for us is when the doors are opened and the foxes run off into the wild. For these animals, it marks the beginning of a new life in the mountains of northern Norway, and for the conservation efforts, it represents another important step towards securing the future of the Arctic fox. From captive breeding to freedom in the Arctic wilderness, Every release moves the species one step further from extinction. And as the foxes disappear into the mountains, the work to protect them continues.